Hello everybody, welcome back to part 2 of Cruise Standard Integration. In part 1, we looked at the Getting Started page, which was identical for Cruise Standard and for Cruise Hybrid. And our last step was step 5, where we initialize Songbird in our sample web app. So now that we've completed with step 5, we can split off into either Cruise Standard or Cruise Hybrid. For this walkthrough, we'll be doing Cruise Standard, so let's go ahead and click on that. Let me just minimize this, and then we can go ahead with the document. So I recommend reading all of this and also familiarizing yourself with the flow. This is the transactional flow for Cruise Standard, so we're going to open that up to see what it looks like. So in this part, we did all the steps from getting started, and we can see that here is like the JWT creation, getting and initializing Songbird, and also after that, there's going to be device data collection. So this is going to get the browser user agent, the width, the height, the color depth. It's going to get all that information, and then it's going to send it through Sentinel so it can be processed for fraud score. So for example, if a user is always shopping from their smartphone and then they do a transaction from, let's just say like a computer or something, they'll be able to see like, oh wait, this user is used to browsing from a phone. So that's what device data is used for. And in standard integration, we don't have to do anything because Cardinal Cruise is going to pass that on the lookup by itself. So we are not even going to touch that. So what we're going to be looking at is the Cardinal start, and then also catching and validating all the responses. So we can close that. Okay, so we're going to start with including bin detection. So let's go ahead and open that. That's going to be on a separate page because there's different ways to do this. So essentially what it's doing is we're getting the first few numbers of the credit card, and we're going to pre-process those so we know how to handle the transaction. So the easiest step is just to include these attributes, I guess, where Songbird is going to look for this ID and this name and this extra data field. And so if we just copy this, and now we're going to integrate it into our code. So here, it's going to be bin detection. So if we just include this, let's see what that looks like. We're going to save that, and then we're going to reload our page, see what that looks like. So here, this is going to be where they input their credit card. But remember, this is where we're going to do all of the consumer credentials. So we want to move it in here. So how we're going to do that is just simply going, we're just going to take this, cut it, and we're going to paste it into here. And then we're just going to have to change, I think is it the name or the ID? I believe. Well, they're the same, so we're just going to do that. Save it. And there we have bin detection. So here, if we start typing something, you can see that the bin is processing and it's getting the device fingerprint data from that bin. So cool, we are finished with step number 6. So now we can go on to the order object. If we scroll down here, these are the standard fields that the merchant should pass through to Sentinel. So here, there's a JSON example of what that looks like. So we're just going to open up that. Okay, so let's take a look at the example JSON. So if we click on the expand source, we're going to see all of the different fields that we can pass. So for example, we can pass the cart, we can, the consumer is going to have email 1, email 2, shipping address, billing address. So we can pass all these different fields, and we don't have to pass all of them. However, I stress that you want to pass the most amount of fields that you have available, as stated before. So if we take a look at some of these fields, let's keep scrolling down. So we see, for example, the order number is required, the amount is required, currency is required, order description is not, the order channel is, the transaction ID, and these are not, I guess the CVV code is if you're using a consumer credit card. The full name is not required, and almost like the full address isn't required, but you do want to pass this in, like we said before with the device data collection fields. The more we can pass to Sentinel, the better their fraud scoring is going to be. So here is going to be the list of everything we can pass and if it is required or not. So we can close this. We can also close spin detection. And I guess one more thing that I wanted to do, or I guess stress, is right here. We can do something like this, like placeholder. So this is something that is mutable, even though it has like these cardinal data fields and ID and stuff. We can still work with it and give it our own CSS and HTML. So if we just go back here, we'll see that our placeholder is there, as well as all of our formatting. Okay, so what is next? What I'm going to do is I'm going to go into our code, and let's pull up, we don't need this anymore, and I'm going to pull up our JavaScript. So here is where we're going to pass our order object requirements. I'm just going to put this inside of a function that we're going to call later. So let's go ahead and put function order objects. So we can do something like this. And right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the video. Okay, so I created all the fields and I titled it under the name variable object. And I changed the name of the function to getOrderObject so there isn't any confusion between the two. And as you can see, there's a lot of commented out code, and that's because I want to get the minimal working example. And let me just stress that you do in fact need the account number, the expiration month, the year, and also the CVV code if it's a credit card. So let's keep scrolling down, and the amount and the order number, I needed to pass that to the front end, which we didn't do in part 1. So I went ahead and added the amount and the order number here, and then I passed it through the HTML, which here we get the order number, and then this is like the JWT as well, and these are both hidden because we don't need to see the order number, and it would be nice for the consumer to see the amount. So I just put it in a div with the ID amount, and I gave it some padding. So let's go here. And I also sliced it so we don't get the, so let's do this. I also sliced it so we only get this right here. And I also did a similar thing with the expiration year. So if we go here, I think this is like what a lot of websites do, is they do something like this. So we need to add a 20 and then grab this. So the expiration year is actually going to be 2020. So that's something to keep in mind. And another thing to keep in mind too is the way that you nest the fields. So we have consumer, account, and then the children field. So account is the child of consumer, and then these three are the children of account. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And the last thing with the order object is the order channel. So this is going to be in the documentation. Let's scroll here. I'm just going to open up a new window, let that load. So the order channel is going to be dependent on how the order is placed. So the best way to do this is to add your own logic. So for example, if there's a mail order telephone order. So if you guys have like a call center that people can call into, it would be like an M. And let's say somebody is like in store and they place an order. This would be retail, and then of course e-commerce, and then mobile device, and then tablet. So these are all important for assessing the fraud score, and you're going to want to code for this too. But for right now, we're just going to do the generic S. And this whole object is going to be called from this function, and then when we call this function, this order object is going to be returned right here. So we're going to need that object when we do step number 8, which we can move on to. The last thing that I should say that I added was in the form, I added this class called form control to make our account a little bit, let's close this, to make our account more uniform to the rest of the fields. So those are all the changes that I did while the video was paused. So let's go ahead and go to step number 8. So we can make this bigger. Okay, so we're going to start Cardinal Consumer Authentication. So how this works is we're just going to pass in our order object, and that should fire up. So let's go ahead and add this down here. Okay, so now we're going to put this underneath a function, so we can call it whenever we want. So we're just going to call it start CCA. And how we're going to get the data object is by calling this function up here called getOrderObject. So we're just going to put data equals this, and then it'll be passed into here. So let's go ahead and save that. Let's go to our web app, reload the cache to make sure it's saved. So when we hit start, I added a function call. So we're going to go up here to our start button, and on click, this is where it starts the function called start CCA, which we just added. So let's go back again. And here we see that the message came back as, where are we? Okay, so the message didn't come back as anything because we didn't put in a credit card, so it doesn't know where to send this information to, what ACS or issuer. So what we're going to do is we're just going to create a generic one. These can be found in the test cases. So we're going to be looking at this in part 3, but if you want some test bins, you can go to, let's go back to the, let's go here and let's search for test. So there's the 2.0 and the 1.0. So let's just go ahead and get a sample of the 1.0 first, because the 2.0 is a little bit trickier because there's more information. So we're just going to take this verify by Visa, this pan right here, and then this is going to be what we expect to return. And like I said, we're going to be looking at this in a later video, but for right now, just to fire up the web app, we're just going to copy this here, and we can see our bin detection happening whenever we change this field right here from what we added before. So now that we have this, we can go ahead and hit start again. And here we see that the error number is 0 and the error description is a success, and everything is looking good. So here we just put in 1, 2, 3, 4, hit submit, and now we're ready to move on to step number 9, which is to validate this. So let's go, we can close these here. Okay. So now we're going to go to step number 9, is handling the CCA response. So let's go back to our code. So after this call, it's going to give us a response, and where that response is going to happen is it's actually going to happen from step number 4 in this event listener. So this catches all of the successful transactions as well as any errors or no actions or failures that happen in the flow. And if we look at the documentation, so for a no action, there's not going to be a liability shift. So if there is a fraud, the merchant's going to have to pay for that transaction. And then a failure, obviously, is that the authentication is not successful. And then an error is something happened in the back end of Sentinel, and it's either the issue with how Cruise was implemented or something with Cardinal. So this is probably going to have to be passed to the back end as well. But for right now, I just created this sample code, which we're going to just copy and paste here. So this just alerts us anytime there is one of these cases. So let's go ahead and save this, go back to our web app, and let's go get a 2.0 test case. Because I said it was trickier because the 2.0 test cases, they require bin detection as well as device fingerprinting. And so sometimes if device fingerprinting doesn't happen, it won't go down 2.0 rails and just default to 1.0, which can cause some issues. But if we just go here, we'll see that our 2.0 card works just fine because our code is as it should be. And it's doing device fingerprinting as well as bin detection. So we can see that it was a great success from here. So we're just going to hit OK. And the reason why we didn't get an ACS window like we did in the 1.0 case is because this is a frictionless. So if we do something like this, and we go start. Okay, so it's actually not 19, so it's actually 91. I'm getting my test cases confused. So let's go ahead and hit start. And now we see the 2.0 ACS window. So we're just going to put 1, 2, 3, 4 again, and then hit submit. And we can see that it was successful. So as you saw, if we did 19, this isn't a card that's loaded. So if we hit that, we can see that there was an issue with authorizing the payment. So it is being caught by this event listener. So what we're going to do next is step number 10. For step number 10, this is going to be the JWT validation. And what we're going to do for that is we're going to pass the JWT to the back end. And so how I did it is I used a Ajax post, and I just created a snippet of what that looks like. So this is going to be an Ajax post to the backend URL, and the data is going to be the JWT, which is coming from the function. And then when that is successful, we're just going to console log it. And if it's an error, I'm just going to do an alert. And for that, let's just save this. For that, we're going to need to go into our base HTML, and we're going to need to get jQuery. So I've already done that, and this is just a minified version because this is going to let us do a Ajax call with the least amount of work. So we can close this out, and then we can write our backend. So let's go to our backend, and the first thing that we're going to need to do is allow the method of get, which was what we were doing previously, and now we're going to also allow post, and then we're going to need to get the request here. So if the request method is a get, this is just going to run the code as we knew it before. So we're going to do something like this, and we can do an else or an else if the request method is a post. Then this is where we're going to add our logic for the JWT validation. I'm just going to post a code snippet to decode the return JWT. So we're going to get the return JWT from getting the data object, which is passed from the front end to the back end with an AJAX call. And then we're going to validate it by doing JWT.decode, and the returned JWT is going to be the first parameter. I guess this is going to be dependent on the JWT decoding library that you choose, but nevertheless, the second parameter is going to be the API key, which was used to sign the first JWT, which is going to be right here. So this signs it, and then here this like unsigns it, and then the audience. So the audience is going to come from right here. So here we see rand int and then rand ID and rand ID. So there's a couple different ways that you can get the JTI down here. I'm just going to do just this way. So have rand ID equals false. So, and we first go to the website, it's going to be false, but so if it is false, we're just going to create a random ID, which we're going to pass through the JWT. And then when we get that, we're just going to change this to being true. And one important distinction about Python is that lists are mutable, so we're going to use a list, whereas like strings aren't, and tuples aren't either. So we're going to make the global rand ID. And I think in the different JWT libraries, you can actually remove this. I know my first implementation, I just went inside of the code and I removed that you need an audience, because the API key is really the key to all this. So just be aware of that. Let's save this. Let's go back here, reload this. Okay, I think, okay, here we go. And then let's go ahead and grab this again. And we're going to fire that up. Okay, so here's the AJAX response. So it was a successful JWT validation. So we can go here and do something like remove this and then wrong API key or something like that. So let's do this, and then we can reload that and then try again. So we can see that there's JWT tampering. So if something is not going as expected in the JWT validation, you should not proceed with the cardholder information. So let's go ahead and change that. And one more thing to point out is the returned object. So we're going to be going through this in the third video. So we can see enrolled Y is good. This is good. Signature verification is good. And then obviously the action code is successful. But eventually we're going to have to pass everything to the backend if we want to track how the errors are being thrown in our front end. So that's going to happen in video number 3. But for right now, this is what we did to complete all of these steps shown right here. So the final step that they recommend is doing the Cardinal consumer authentication test cases, which come from right here. So we want to do both the 2.0 and the 1.0 cases. So if we go here to the link, it'll show both of those, and then that's where we're going to have to go next with these series. And if anybody has any questions, please leave them down below. Again, the code is going to be uploaded to GitHub, and you can always get it from there. Thank you very much, and I'll see everybody in the next tutorial.